Now, I knew going into Remake that it was only going to consist of Midgar, but after playing the original game's Midgar section, I was like, well, how the hell are they going to make a full game out of that? However, once I beat Remake, I was like, wow, that actually works really well. It works way better than it has any right to do so. And that's how I feel about this game's story, essentially. Like, it sounds really bad, like just expanding out Midgar a ton. And to be fair, there is a lot of filler in there. But considering all the moments that we got because of that expansion, I'll take it. It's actually really bizarre, like, that this game gets to sort of have its cake and eat it too in a narrative sense. That it still feels like a prologue to something way bigger, but at the same time, it gets to have a full, not only story arc, but character arc alongside of it for a lot of the characters in the game. Take, for example, the reveal that Aerith is a Cetra. I mean, it is a very early reveal in the original game. It is necessary for the rest of the game. But in Remake, it gets to be not only sort of fundamental to the games going forward, but also it is kind of a sort of late game reveal. I wouldn't call it a plot twist, but it is a late game reveal that really does change a lot about your understanding of Aerith as a character. So I think that's where this game really excels, where sort of narrative points that already existed in that original section, but taken with a full narrative arc into account, I think is where this game's story really excels at. I do think some of the new stuff is cool, don't get me wrong. I think a lot of the additions of Jessie, Biggs, and Wedge as characters and like fully fleshing them out are like really cool, substantial things. Another great example is the whole blowing up the pillar thing. In the original game, like, it was a horrible thing that the pillar, you know, got destroyed and the plate sort of crushed everybody, and that really motivates you to want to go out and destroy Shinra. But in the remake, they make it like this whole big thing about, you know, oh, we gotta stop them, and it's been culminating to this, and, you know, it resolves the character arc of Jessie, like, Jessie's development, like, for the previous entire game finally culminates at this specific moment, and she dies, and you really do feel something, whereas in the original, some NPCs you don't really know die. But as much as the new stuff and the expanded stuff I like, there is like a fair amount of filler in the game that does really do feel like it does waste your time for no good reason. And I'm sure that your tolerance level for some of these segments may be higher or lower. But for example, did we really need to go back to the sewer a second time after we spent a whole chapter in the sewers the first time? Probably not. Don't get me wrong, I like some of the Don Corneo stuff in like the second sewer visit, and I do like some of the sewer enemies a little bit, but you could have just made the Don Corneo stuff like a couple of cutscenes and put them in later. Like, I could easily imagine you go to the Shinra building and Don Corneo is just like talking to some executive or something there. Like, he is like trying to talk about them not punishing him for him failing the first time or something. It would have been like actually really smart and like better have integrated with the story rather than, oh, we need to go back into the sewers to go get some grappling hooks, and then, oh, Don Corneo just happened to be down there, oops. And then there's some new stuff that I am mixed about, like the expansion of the train graveyard to like an hour long. I did not like how long it was from like a gameplay standpoint, but from an narrative standpoint, I liked it in the sense that it sort of teased Aerith's supernatural abilities and sort of foreshadowed her reveal as an ancient / Cetra later in the game. So I do feel mixed about that. Roach, I have no idea what to feel about him, to be honest. Like, I can see the argument for Roach as like a sort of like interesting rival to Cloud and sort of a way to sort of measure Cloud against, and like having a rival and sort of seeing his narrative progression throughout this remake series. And I do see the appeal in it, sort of including a character who is a meta commentary on how shitty the writing of stuff like Advent Children is, or sort of stuff that's after the original FF7, and everybody is kind of like meta aware of it, and he is just a completely different psycho character. But on the other hand, you could make the argument that he is a really bad inclusion because he's just space filler to fill space for 2 boss fights in the chapter he shows up in, and that he is just an anomaly, and that his one inclusion isn't self-aware at all, and just absolutely ruins the tone of the entire game with his inclusion and his voice direction. But can we talk about how this is like the most surprisingly top-tier voice acting like that's come out of a game? Yeah, we expect top-tier voice acting from like a Naughty Dog game, but I personally didn't expect that. Like, I would have expected it to be good, but I didn't think it was going to be like knock my socks off type stuff. And I am like incredibly surprised at how good and natural the characters sound. And like, some of my favorite voice acted characters ever come from this game. It is that good. It's actually really hard to pick probably a favorite voice acted character out of the entire cast of this game because they all do their job, like, really well. Well, for one thing, they managed to make Barrett's whole Mr. T shtick, like, actually work for the whole game. Like, if you heard that, oh, Barrett's gonna be voice acted, you know, trying to sound like Mr. T, like he was translated in the original game, you'd think that'd be a little bit of a disaster, right? But they not only managed to make it work and not get on your nerves, but they actually managed to give his character, like, depth, like, through his voice acting. Like, he can be serious when he needs to be serious.
No, you can't think like that. Whatever came before it was Shinra that pulled the trigger today. Am I right?
Yeah.
I know everyone's hyped up Aerith in this remake as having really good voice acting, and I do agree, but like, it's so good that it kind of ruins every other voice-acted Aerith for me. Like, it is kind of impossible for me to, like, listen to Aerith voiced by anybody else without it kind of feeling like, sort of like nails on a chalkboard in comparison.
So we need to make the most of the time we have. To live our lives the way we want to live. Every minute, every moment matters.
I'll remember that.
Good.
But I think the best voice acting in the entire game surprisingly comes from Tifa. Like, I have no idea how Square Enix even found the woman who voices her. She is like an S-tier ranking in an already, like, stellar voice cast. You listen to her in the cutscenes, and, like, you can tell every emotion that she has when she's talking, and yet it all sounds natural. It's incredible.
We'll ask the questions. Like, why'd you have men in Sector 7 asking about Avalanche?
Huh? Don't know what you're talking about.
Don't play dumb with me. Let's try again. Why did you have men in Sector 7 asking about Avalanche? Spill the beans. Or...
I'll cut him off.
Oh, let's talk about the combat system. The combat system, oh boy. The combat system that everybody was freaking out about for how many years now since people found out it was going to be a real-time based game? Now, is this game sort of a high-octane, fast-paced action game quite like Kingdom Hearts? Obviously not. But it's not necessarily trying to be. This game's strengths, I really think, do come from the fact that you have teammates and that you switch between playing as multiple characters and the differences between the characters and their playstyles, and using all of those tools given to you in order to defeat the enemies that you're fighting. I see that Square Enix has taken to heart, like, my and many others' criticism that all the characters sort of play the same in the original. So I'm really glad that in this remake that the play styles of everybody are like so different from each other. The game really does make you think about character roles and sort of what the purpose of each character is. That Cloud is this big damage dealer that can counter enemy attacks, and Tifa is for building up stagger very quickly, and Aerith is this really powerful mage that can buff everybody else, and Barrett is the tank that can easily hit airborne enemies from a very far distance. And it asks you to switch between all of them on a frequent basis and use their ATB to use abilities all the time. I do like how much this game really forces you to sort of adapt to different team setups throughout the entire game story. And obviously that's a holdover from the original FF7 and how its story went. But it's a testament to how different these characters play, that using a team like Cloud, Barrett, Tifa is different from Cloud, Tifa, Aerith. That it's taking me some time to sort of adjust my strategies to use one team or the other. And especially when you get to like that sort of that final gauntlet when you're climbing the Shinra Tower and you're going, you know, from Cloud fighting Rufus Shinra alone to Aerith and Barrett and Red 13 fighting that big-ass tank thing. It really is, like, a huge shift in, like, gameplay style that I really like. Probably my favorite character to play as in the game is Aerith. She has a very unorthodox playstyle, and I haven't really dug that much into her because, unfortunately, the game doesn't really give you a lot of opportunities to use her. Because she is, like, crazy. Like, her normal physical attacks don't really do a lot, but they're more there to charge up ATB gauge. More so than every other playable character. And she can do some crazy stuff. Like, casting that circle to cast spells twice is insane. And then combine that with, I think one of the abilities is you can steal MP back from enemies. And so you can, like, cast Thundaga in this circle, cast it again, and then the enemy probably will get staggered from it, and then you cast this ability, and then get a good portion of the MP you spent back from that enemy that you just staggered. Like, she's crazy. I love it. Now, for a base game playthrough, yeah, it is a little bit brain dead. Like, you can kind of get away with spamming certain types of magic and just pressing attack and occasionally switching to another party member. But hard mode really does, like, force you to, like, really think about the systems and really pushes your limits. If you're just gonna play as Cloud and switch to another character like every 2 to 3 minutes, you are going to die. You need to switch characters on a regular basis. It is how you survive. It is how you have momentum. But once you figure out sort of the game plan and generally what more optimal play looks like in hard mode, it's actually really, really fun, especially against the bosses. And can I take a moment to congratulate the boss designers for this game, especially for the hard mode content, because they really did put in a lot of effort for these bosses, not just in terms of mechanics and also sort of theming, but just like the whole package. Take Airbuster, for example, in Remake. In the original, he's like the second or third boss that you fight, and he's fine. Like, he helps you kind of better understand the mechanics and sort of strategize a little bit more, kind of sort of forcing you to understand your options so you'd have to use them more later. But Airbuster in Remake is like a whole, like, event in and of itself. Like, there is so much going on with that. I mean, firstly, it's a big turning point in the story that Shinra reveals that, oh, you guys, Avalanche, you guys were actually just doing our bidding. Like, you destroying all the reactors and stuff helps us further our goals and let us do what we want with this public support. And, like, there's a whole big thing about he has multiple phases, and, like, part of the bridge collapses, and, like, there's fire coming from underneath. Takes all those emotions you built up from that point in the game, and, like, just kind of interweaves them with, like, this boss. Like, this hard boss. But Square Enix didn't have to go this hard. They could have just made Airbuster, like, like a checkbox. Like, okay, remake, okay, we have to include this boss from the original that was there, okay, check it off, whatever. We're just gonna give him, like a one-phase boss fight, like the original. Like, they took what was ultimately just another tutorial boss, and then turned it into, like, this magnum opus about what Shinra's goals are, and how the heroes have sort of been duped into what they were doing, and ultimately, like, them facing down their own destruction, and them sort of fighting for their lives while Airbuster just completely destroys everything around them. And the music is, like, the most insane part about this whole experience. In any other game, Airbuster's theme would be, like, the final boss theme of any other video game. This is what I love about this remake. Now, I do have some complaints about the combat system with this game, but, like, most of them, I can't entirely tell if it was, like, an oversight or, like, it was just, like, a really bad deliberate decision. Now, obviously, the big one is no jump button. Why? Why is there no jump button in this game? Like, it baffles me. I mean, yes, most of the game, the enemies are stuck on the ground, and when there are airborne enemies, you probably have Barrett with you to handle them, or Aerith, where you can just magic them out of the air, which, alright, but trying to use, like, Cloud or Tifa on, like, airborne enemies, like, just sucks. I think the auto jump might even, like, be broken, like, it might not even function correctly, because I've had a lot of times where playing as Cloud or Tifa, like, there will be enemies that are high up enough off the ground where, like, most of my attacks won't hit. Like, maybe the very tip of, like, hitboxes on certain attacks will hit them. But, like, they're not high enough off the ground to where it triggers the auto jump. And that's, like, a really weird problem. If you want a perfect encapsulation of that, there's one room in Hojo's lab that, like, I wanted to scream it was that bad. At least on hard mode. Where, like, you have to fight, like, a couple of the flying enemies that create shields for themselves. So basically, as Barrett, your normal attacks don't do anything. Your ATB attacks don't do anything. And then you switch to Cloud, you try to do something, you try to get in the air. Oh, the enemy's not high enough off the ground for your, jump to trigger. And then you try your normal attacks, nothing works, and then ATB attacks. So basically, you're just kind of sitting there. I can't believe that the same company makes both Kingdom Hearts, a game with good aerial combat and good aerial tracking, and FF7R, where they just decided to not have a jump button, where a good amount of your time is spent on fighting aerial enemies. Like, it's not the majority of your time, but it's enough that they need the system to be more functional. Another thing I found really annoying and got, like, way worse by, like, the final chapters playing hard mode was enemies hitting you out of, like, your ATB attacks. And basically, you lose your ATB gauge and the attack at the same time. Now, I know a lot of action RPGs do, like, a similar thing, where you lose your MP and, you casting your ability if you get hit. But the thing is, with FF7R, is that the ATB gauge is a much larger percentage of, like, the work that you're doing. That if you get hit in FF7R, you lose, like, 50% of your ATB gauge, or if you're using refocus, like, 33%. But in FF7R, your normal attacks do barely any damage, and the whole point of them is to build the ATB gauge. And so, I don't know why that your attacks that actually do damage, and, like, have specific purposes that they try to achieve, like, are the ones that you get hit out of the most. And a lot of these ATB moves don't even seem to have that many iframes anyways. So, it does seem like Square Enix deliberately was like, okay, if you get hit while you do this, you're gonna lose it. Like, you can't use some of your iframes to advantage because they're gonna give you no iframes. When I first started working on this project, I didn't understand, like, the appeal of the original Final Fantasy VII at all. I never got why people were so obsessed with this game. Like, I didn't get why people were so fixated on this one particular game when there are so many other Final Fantasy games and even JRPGs out there which I thought did similar things, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what the appeal was outside of nostalgia and just being a really good selling game that everybody has a common experience of. But after I played Remake, I think I really understood the appeal of the original. The mix of fantasy and modern aspects is obviously been done tons of times since then, but the Lovecraftian element really helps set the game apart. I think the moment I really fell in love with FF7's world and I really, like, understood the appeal of the original was the Dreamweaver fight in Remake, because the Jenova fights in the original game, like, I like them, and they're cool, but I'm kind of trying to do a lot more imagining due to limited graphics and stuff, and I was into it, but I wasn't quite, like, super duper into it. You've been fighting a lot of weird shit in the game before, like, okay, I'm fighting, like, a big, weird, meteor-shaped thing, or a big, tall monster, like, how is that any different from, like, the hell houses I fought like 30 hours ago? But the Dreamweaver fight in Remake just cranks that up to 11. It'd take you out of the Shinra building and take you to a completely different location and fight this weird, disgusting boss that has crazy magic spells that do all these weird status effects and has all this, like, surreal shit happen and then just, like, completely disappear once you beat it. Like, I really did, like, understand the appeal of the world after that. But it's also not just the world, but also the characters. I like the characters in the original game just fine, but I mean, I consider myself pretty proficient in playing, like, retro games. Like, I've been playing retro games from before I was born, and I think most people wouldn't even, like, dare to do that. And yet, it's kind of hard for even me to sort of parse through text and try to fully read the emotion from it. And so, to see Remake not only have these characters fully voice acted, but also with full motion capture and, like, proper cutscenes with a, like, fully dynamic camera, like, really made me care a lot about these characters. Like, not just their remake versions, but also them in the originals, too. And so I think it might be a little bit blasphemous for me to say this, but I think the technological advancements of Remake and just being able to better present stuff that was already there helped me better understand what people saw in the original game in the first place that appealed to them so much. That, you know, I don't love Aerith due to me reading text about, you know, her quirky personality and then, you know, sitting, you know, 100 feet in the sky, looking at her, you know, waddle around with her simple PS1 model, but I can hear her, and I can see her fully motion captured and see the way she moves and stuff, and sort of see cutscenes with her and get intimate and personal. Now, depending on your feelings on the remake, you're probably going to be feeling either, wow, you know, that's a really nuanced understanding, and that's really an interesting interpretation that, you know, the remake helps you sort of better understand other people's perspectives on the original. Or I've somehow committed the worst artistic interpretation crime because I'm taking my feelings and thoughts about the remake and then sort of transplanting them onto my perception of what other people felt playing the original. So while I do think that remake is, like, less narratively focused than, you know, the entirety of the original FF7. And if you're just comparing Midgar, way less than FF7's original Midgar section, I do think that the good in there outshines sort of the mediocre and the bad. Now, that's all the content I think most people can agree on as being good or not good. But, oh boy, let's talk about the thing that makes or breaks it for a lot of people for this game. Now let's talk about what element of the FF7 remake is probably the most hated, which is the ending. Now, if you're an outsider, you might be wondering, well, what's so controversial about this remake? Well, this ending is definitely it. So here's the ending to the original game's Midgar section. And here's just a slight snippet of the ending of FF7 Remake.
Sephiroth.
Cloud, lend me your strength. Let us defy destiny together.
Wait. Was that all of them?
Now, at the center of all these changes, you know, not just aside from the whispers or the implications of certain characters being alive that should have died originally, or the ideas about fate and destiny, at the center of all of this is Sephiroth. Now let's just kind of analyze Sephiroth's appearance in this game on kind of a base level, because, you know, it kind of seems questionable, you know, unless you start really theory crafting, which we're not there yet. Now, if you were to ask me in the planning stages process of this game, right, irregardless of the current direction they're deciding to go, that, you know, somebody came up to me and said, hey, would you like Sephiroth to appear at all in this game, you know, this early in the general FF7 storyline? I would have said no. Now, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Sephiroth's appearances, because I really like thinking about it and, you know, theory crafting around it, but, like, if you just take it on the surface, like, his appearances are so, like, scatterbrained and random most of the time. I mean, a lot of the time, he just kind of shows up and is just there, and what he says is just kind of meaningless and then disappears. So he doesn't really add anything to the scene aside from him just being there, being the scene. I mean, it almost became kind of a meme for me at one point to try to guess what awkward situation Sephiroth was gonna show up in next. I mean, there was that one scene where after Aerith and Cloud rescue that kid, and then they go back to, like, the kid's hideout, there's, like, a Black Cloak that appears out of nowhere, and then Sephiroth just is there. Like, what? But Sephiroth is really badly explained in the game, too. Like, if you've never played the original, and you just played this game, which it seems like it's a lot of the intent of this remake, like, you have no idea who this Sephiroth guy is. Like, they talk about stuff, and, like, you have no context to any of it. At least outside of that, I'm glad they at least set it up in terms of, like, him just appearing and messing with Cloud, because if he was nowhere in this game, and then they just put him into the final boss in Chapter 18, it was like, hey guys, it's Sephiroth, could you imagine the reaction to that? Now, in doing my gameplay recording of FF7 Remake, I noticed that, you know, depending on how you count it, Sephiroth has around 40 minutes of on-screen time in this game, which is an incredibly massive upgrade for a character who was mentioned passingly, like, 2 or 3 times prior to the Shinra building in the original. Now, here's the thing, is that this game can take you, like, 40 hours, you know, if you go at a normal pace, you do some of the side quests, but not all of them. And so when you consider it in that context, 40 minutes really isn't a lot. Some people might argue that you would need more time to properly establish something like that. So considering what Square Enix did and sort of the runtime they were given for like the average play length of the game, I thought they did a good job. Now, it's not to say that I like Sephiroth as a final boss. I don't like it. I don't like it that it kind of derails the narrative in a totally different direction. I like that direction, but it still derails the narrative. Now, if they made Sephiroth a secret boss, like in the Kingdom Hearts games, oh yeah, I would have totally been down for that. I'm willing to say that Kingdom Hearts secret bosses are one of the best things in gaming. I mean, these bosses not only force you to utilize all the mechanics the game has taught you to your fullest, but also it pushes your skill level to the absolute max. And once you finally beat that boss, you get rewarded with some deep lore that you can speculate on and talk about. I mean, all the Zack cutscenes would have worked a ton better if they were a secret ending, rather than just kind of awkwardly interspersed throughout the final chapter of the game. Which is kind of weird, because I criticized the original for not having the Zack cutscene in the main game, but I will defend Square Enix a little bit when it comes to putting Sephiroth as the final boss of this game. While Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts do have a lot of overlap in terms of the people that like them, I think 7 Remake tends to skew a little bit more mainstream with its appeal. And so while Kingdom Hearts fans, I think, are way more in tune with the secret boss style of fighting the secret boss, these really hard bosses, and then getting a secret cutscene and talking about it and speculating it, and it's kind of a part of that series at this point. For FF7 Remake, I don't think they're as likely to seek out and try on optional content just for a tease for the next game. And so, for Square Enix, I don't think they really had a lot of choice here, because they could have put Sephiroth as a secret boss, and they could have had the ending be similar to the original, or maybe put a different final boss, and then, you know, people would have not been interested in the second part as much, and that would hurt their sales and their ability to continue this series. So I think for them, they would have wanted to go down the path they did anyways with this story, and so by putting it as a final boss, they are putting it in people's faces, hey, we have something interesting going on with this series, you know, there is much more going on here than it just being a straight remake. So while I dislike this choice, I can understand why Square Enix did it this way.